Good evening, Excellencies, distinguished guests, students, and faculty. On behalf of Georgetown University in Qatar, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this important event on the economy of Qatar. Today's presentation kicks off a series of events commemorating the centennial celebration of the Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service. These celebrations mark an important milestone for our entire university and for our campus in Doha in particular. In the inauguration ceremony that launched Georgetown's new School of Foreign Service in Washington in 1919, Father Walsh, the new dean of the school, said the following in his dedicatory remarks, and I quote, "Having entered upon the stage of world politics and world commerce, we assume worldwide obligations. Our viewpoint can never be quite the same again. The establishment of a program dedicated to educating students on local and global issues and preparing them for lives of service is in an increasingly interconnected world, is a 100-year legacy we are proud to continue today on Georgetown's Qatar campus. Since we entered upon the stage of Qatar's growth and development, we have been honored to assume the obligations of our partnership with Qatar Foundation to contribute to the goals and aspirations of an ambitious nation. It is against this backdrop that I'm proud to present today's speaker, a preeminent scholar, researcher, published author, and professor who exemplifies both in the breadth of his work and the depth of his expertise, the best that Georgetown has to offer. Dr. Alexis Antoniades is an associate professor and director of international economics here at Georgetown, Qatar, and is an expert on global markets and a leading authority on the economies of Gulf countries, and in particular, the economy of Qatar. He teaches courses on money and banking, international finance, and the global financial system, to name a few. Dr. Antoniades received his PhD in economics from Columbia University. He was named a Fulbright Scholar and has been awarded the Princeton University Niehaus Fellowship in 2012, a fellowship given to the most talented scholar on issues of globalization and governance. He spent the 2012-13 academic year at Princeton University, where he became a member of the European Union program at the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. And closer to home, Dr. Antoniades was awarded two very prestigious grants from the Qatar National Research Fund to undertake the first micro-study on the economies of the Gulf countries, and the second was a research grant to use social media and analyze sentiment in the Arab world in collaboration with colleagues from Qatar University. So indeed, we are in good hands for today's critical exploration of the new social, political, and economic realities that have placed Qatar at the crossroads once again. I say once again because Qatar has been at the crossroads before. Faced with the unsustainable promise of fossil fuels, the nation chose a path of economic diversification and social development. And structural and economic demographic changes came swiftly on the heels of its implementation. So, where is this economy now? What are the new challenges facing Qatar's prosperity and pursuit of its national vision? What are the unexplored opportunities and recommendations for its future? These are some of the questions that Dr. Antoniades will attempt to address in his talk. So without further ado, I know you want to listen to him, not to me. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Antoniades.
Thank you, Dean Dalal. Welcome, guests. Qatar is at the crossroads, from falling and fluctuating oil prices to changes in the socioeconomic structure to the illegal and unjust blockade. I think you agree with me that we are experiencing a turning moment in the history of the country. And what I would like to do for the next hour is share with you my understanding of what the economy looks like at the point, and moving forward, which is more important, what are the main challenges, but also the opportunities. And we all come from different backgrounds. We've been here for different periods of time, so our understanding differs. I hope I can give you some insights from my from how I make sense of what's around me, that you can take and connect them with your experience and leave this room with a better understanding. I've been in Qatar, as Din Dalal said, for 10 years now. And as a friend says, I drive like a Qatari now. But, and I didn't know much about the country before. But a year before, in October of 2007, 11 years ago, I was in the US and I was reading the Financial Times, and they had a report on Qatar. It was a 4-page report, Emirate pushes on global stage. And they had a photo, and I want to come to that because I found that very intriguing back then, and I still find it very intriguing now. So it was about on the first paragraph, they talked about the Asian Games, and they start saying, as Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Qatar's crown prince, rode an Arabian horse up a flight of wet steps, his mount slipped. So they talk about the Asian Games. It never rains in Doha, but that particular night that you didn't want to have any rain, like tonight, it did rain. And it was very dangerous to go up the steps and light the Olympic flame. But the entire stadium missed a heartbeat as presentational disaster loomed, but Sheikh Tamim, a skilled equestrian, managed to guide the stallion up to the last few meters to light the Olympic flame. The fear quickly morphed into a sense of achievement that Qatar, through the Games, had finally arrived on global stage. And it is fascinating at many levels. The first one is, this is not His Highness Sheikh Tamim. This is his brother. But that was the understanding of the world back then. They didn't, 11 years ago, they didn't know where Qatar was. They wrote a report on us on the Financial Times, and they couldn't get the name right. You look at Emirate. We don't refer to Qatar as an emirate. It's a country, it's a state. And the titles are interesting. Investing in its own future pays off. Higher profile means higher scrutiny. Build it and they will come. It's as if you're reading a report from yesterday. Still very relevant. But what I found intriguing, because I couldn't tell who that person was back then, they used this example of going up the steps when everybody thought maybe he shouldn't do it. Everybody was very skeptical. So Qatar faced a challenge, but somehow they found a way to succeed and prove everybody that they were right. And the article says this wasn't the first time. In 1992, Qatar faced financial difficulties. And the Undersecretary in the Ministry of the Economy, Trade and Finance back then, Yusuf Kamal, who became the finance minister, went against the view of the IMF and borrowed to expand our capacity to monetize the natural reserves. And that was proven successful. And if you go back in time, the gas was discovered in 1971, but the price wasn't very high. And the emir back then decided, against the skepticism of many, to borrow heavily to build the infrastructure that allowed this country to become a rich country. So I think this is intriguing because this is not the first time the country is facing a challenge. This will not be the last time it will face a challenge, but somehow the country always finds a way to succeed because they are very well prepared. And I hope this will be one of these times. So I want to structure my talk in 4 sections. First, I want to tell you what I think should be the objectives of this country. Because if we want to discuss where should we want the country to go, we always need to ask a question. What are the objectives? So I will get that out of the way first. Then I will discuss the current economic environment. What is going on? And the economy is slowing down. So I'll also explain what are the main reasons behind this slowdown. And of course, in doing so, we need to ask a question. Is it because of the blockade? What was the impact of the blockade? And finally, we will move on to what I think is the most important part, which is how do we move forward? Because in the current situation, we have no control. But how do we move forward? What are the main challenges? What are some of the limitations? But also, what are the opportunities? And what are the steps that will help us reach our goals? This is the plan for the talk. And I hope I can spend the next 40 minutes to go over this information. And then we'll have a Q&A session, so we can go into more depth on the issues that you are interested in. For us living in the country, we don't realize how fast the country has changed. We may see a little bit of traffic and complain without realizing that many years ago we didn't have the superb infrastructure network. This is a photo from 1983. That's a photo of West Bay. There was nothing there, just the Sheraton. And in such a short period of time, the country has grown substantially. We have a superb educational system. It is often said that when his father, the father Emir was born, you had no schools in Qatar. Huge progress in 50, 60 years. We have superb infrastructure in this country. A world award-winning airline that connects us to more than 150 international destinations. So we are centrally located. And most importantly, we have a friendly, committed, and supportive political regime. So the country has made a lot of progress. And many times we fail to recognize that because we live the moment. And it's good to take a step back. But there are challenges. And to me, there are three main challenges that Qatar has to address. The first challenge is how do we preserve the wealth for the future generation? We can extract a lot of natural gas and sell it, but we need to preserve the wealth or the gas for future generations. How do we do that? How do we diversify the economy? The second challenge is a demographics challenge. In this part of the world, we have a very young population. 50% of the population is below the age of 20, unlike Europe, Japan, the US. That means that we need to be able to create a lot of jobs very fast, because these people will enter the labor force very soon, and we need to create jobs for them. And we cannot keep adding people in the government. We need to create jobs in the private sector. And we need to work both on the supply to create these jobs, but also on the demand to make these jobs appealing for the local population. And we may be better off because we are a rich country than other Middle Eastern countries, but it is a major challenge. So this is the second challenge. The third challenge is a new challenge. Actually, I didn't have this as a challenge 10 years ago when I was talking about Qatar. And what we need now is to attract investment and businesses to come here. How to attract money. And this is new. The country always had money. And the challenge was how to manage our own wealth. And the country will always have money. But now we need to attract money. And it's not very obvious, and one reason for many reasons. But one of them is that Qataris are not salespeople. They had money. They became experts in finding investment opportunities in their own country and taking advantage of them. Then the country was too small for them. So then they started making investments outside. They made investments in London. They could understand the market very well. They are key investors. But they never had to go and convince people to invest in their country. And they're not salespeople, and we often forget that. So it takes a different approach when you try to promote your country, and you shouldn't be shy about the infrastructure, about the opportunities. So for me, these are the three challenges the country has to solve. Now, I will move on quickly to the second section. What's going on with the economy right now? And all of you, because you live in this country, you know that the economy has slowed down. If you walk to a shopping mall during the day, you don't see a lot of people. If you go to a hotel, again, you don't see a lot of people. So we can look at GDP, gross domestic product, and what we find is that growth has slowed down in the last couple of years, and it's been slowing down before. But I want to move away from that statistic because that's linked to the price of oil. I like to look at some other data. So what I have here is revenue per room in a five-star hotel. So what's the average revenue? What's the average profit a hotel makes, a five-star hotel makes? Not the cost of the room, but the profit they make from renting that room. And over the last 2.5 years, it went from around 700 riyals to 300. There's a big decline. We can look at private car registrations. How many cars do we register each month? And I know there's one member of the audience sitting who works in a dealership. and this is not a good slide, I'm sorry, but in less than 3 years, we went from 10,500 cars registered each month to 3,500. There is a slowdown, we cannot deny that. And it doesn't seem that this has reached the bottom. Maybe it has, but the graph will not show that. So what could explain that? What are the reasons behind the slowdown? The obvious one is oil prices. Oil prices have collapsed in 2014. They went from $100 to less than $30 a barrel. And because our wealth is linked to the price of oil, it affected the ability of the government to invest in many projects. So that's the first factor. But that's not the only one. The second reason is that in the photo I showed you, which is this one, there was nothing on the ground. So the country went through 2 or 3 decades of massive spending on infrastructure. We had to build the country. We had to build schools, we had to build hospitals, hotels, shopping malls, highways, the airport, invest at Qatar Airways. But we are finishing that stage. It's done. We built the country. There is no more space to add more stuff. And this will come to an end. So we need to seek for new engines of growth. This is a structural change that is taking place. And a healthy one. We need to move on. The third structural change is that purchasing power, the ability of people to spend, is going down. If we look at population numbers, the population is going up. But if you look closer, it's going up because we get a lot of low-skilled workers now to maintain the infrastructure we have built. We get a lot of workers to staff retail space in the shopping malls we have. We get a lot of workers to fill the hotels, reception, and the restaurants. Their purchasing power is not the same as the people they are replacing. A lot of high-paying expats are no longer in the country. A lot of them that are in the country, they have seen their package going down in terms of housing allowance, in terms of schooling. Even the locals, they see their purchasing power going down, either because they decide to make more investments outside when they observe the situation, or because their income, say from real estate, has gone down, but also the cost of living has gone up. So purchasing power is going down. And I don't think that is going to change. What may change in the future is to get more people with high-paying jobs. But purchasing power is going down. And the fourth reason why the economy is slowing down is because we have a mismatch between the demand and the supply in many sectors. There's more supply than demand. You can see that in retail space. We have a lot of shopping malls, but there isn't enough demand. And you go to some shopping malls during the day, on a weekday, and you don't see a lot of people. But the supply keeps rising. I have the example of the hotel industry. If you take the first half of this year compared to the first half of last year, tourism has gone down by 35%. And that's mainly the GCC. And although we have a lot of initiatives to bring tourists, free visa for 80 nationalities and so on, we haven't seen the numbers going up yet because these things take time. So we haven't seen the numbers from Europe going up. We haven't seen the numbers from US going up. So while tourism is down, what happens to the supply of hotels? Just in the first half of 2018, we have 6% more hotels than we had a year before. Last year, we had 10% more than the year before. We have 45 hotels and 30-something residential towers going up in the coming years. So until we reach the World Cup, and maybe a few years later, we will keep adding around 10% on the supply of hotel rooms. But the demand is low. So that creates a mismatch. And prices have to go down, and business is not very good. So this is the economic environment. But I also want to talk about business, the business environment. It used to be very simple to do a business in the country a decade ago. It was a simple environment. You had a local business that did business locally, so you didn't care a lot about exchange rates in the outside world. The regulatory framework was protecting businesses. The owner was the founder that was controlling the company. That has changed. The environment is very different now if you want to launch a business. Geopolitics are very different. Regulation is very different. We don't support monopolies. There's more competition. And what is also different is family structure. So I want to spend a couple of minutes on that. If you look at the private sector in Qatar, it's mainly driven by family-owned businesses. And if you look at those businesses, and they've been very successful, and the people behind them worked very hard, but they are going through a succession right now, because many of the big businesses were established by the grandparents. And they went through one succession. They gave it to the children. But now for many of them, we are going through the third succession, the third generation succession. And this is problematic because you can give a company to your children, but now they have their own children. So now there are so many grandchildren, cousins. How do you transfer a company? Especially when we go through a slowdown. And I think a lot of the family-owned businesses here, they face the third generation succession problem. And globally, what we know is that only 30% of the companies make it to the second generation. And only 13% will make it to the third generation. And our family-owned companies in Qatar, many of them have to go through this third generation transition in the midst of a slowdown and in the midst of uncertainty. So they need to establish specific goals and objectives and decision-making process, a succession plan, and a transition plan. So there are a lot of challenges in the business world. But we want those companies to do very well, because to grow, we rely on these companies and new companies, but we need to save the ones we already have. So naturally, we may ask, well, what's the impact of the blockade on all this? Did it affect us? And to assess the impact, the point I want to make as economists, we cannot see the economy before that was doing better than after and say the impact affected the economy. It could be a trend. It could be that the economy was slowing down before. So of course, after the blockade, there's more slowdown, which seems to be the case. It could be a shock, but this wasn't the case. And it could be cyclicality. The blockade was initiated on June 5th. In the summer months, the economy is always slowed down. Everybody's away. So when we try to assess the impact, we have to be careful not to attribute everything to the blockade, especially trend and cyclicality, which were very, very important for our economy. So what were the concerns when the blockade happened? When the blockade happened, you all know that there was a disruption in the supply chain. Everything, or most of the things we get here would come from UAE, from Saudi. So we lost the supply chain immediately. And the first thing this government did was to ensure that we had things on the shelves. And milk actually was the most important one. Because when the blockade happened, they took a look around and they said, what's the one thing that's more important and it's going to expire? And that was milk. And milk has an expiration of 3 days. So they said, okay, for diapers, we can wait 10 days. For juice, 5 days. But milk, we have 3 days to solve this. And the planes went to Turkey and they brought milk. And for us who lived here, the only recollection we have of that is going to Carrefour and finding the Turkish milk, and we couldn't read the label, and we had to take photos and send it to our Turkish friends and say, this is 1.5% or 2%. That's the only inconvenience we have. Or that the coffee at Paul tastes different with the Turkish milk. But that's all, because the government was well prepared and they took immediate action. And that is not obvious. When the East Asian crisis hit in 1997, and it brought the East Asian tigers to a state of despair and panic, the IMF stepped in, and they called for raising interest rates, restructuring, austerity, and they exacerbated the problem. And they've been criticized for their action. But one criticism is that they failed to realize that the crisis became a humanitarian crisis. People were losing their jobs, they were losing their income, and they failed to act. In this case, the government, the first thing they did was to make sure that people are fine. And I think that's very important. Now, we had concerns. Banking sector was a very big concern because a lot of the money, especially the deposits of the expat, left the banking sector. And that creates all sorts of problems. It can lead to speculation against the currency. It can cause downgrades of our credit rating. But again, the government and Qatar Investment Authority and the central bank took decisive action to replace the deposits that left and send the message that the economy is very strong. And there was some pressure on the currency, but because of the actions of the government and over time oil prices were going down, the tension on the currency peg diminished over time. One concern that I want to highlight were the rating agencies. They put a score on our risk. And when they heard about the blockade and they don't understand exactly what's going on in the country, the first thing they wanted to do was to play it safe and downgrade us. So they put us on a negative watch. And if you read their reports, they said that one reason for the potential downgrading is because they cannot get access to data from the banks, but also because, I guess to justify their position, they said maybe defaults in the construction sector will go up, and that will cause more bad loans in the banking sector, and therefore it will affect the financial sector in Qatar. Bless you. And that didn't happen. So I'll explain what I think is a key moment that nobody noticed. And that was October 1st, 2017. What happened that day? The Ministry of Development Planning and Statistics released the numbers for GDP growth in the second quarter of 2017. And why was this a key moment? Because the second quarter has April, May, and June, the first month of the blockade. And up until that point, our story was that the blockade has no impact on us. It's a blessing in disguise. So in GDP of the second quarter would have been the first time that we would see actual numbers. And the numbers were bad. Slowed to its lowest rate since the global financial crisis. But look at the next thing. Sanctions inflicted minor damage. Nobody realized that. It's a paradox. It was the slowest, and all the news said, so the blockade had no impact. Why? Because part of it was a drop in oil prices, and we were able to communicate to them that if you look at the non-oil sector, it's been growing much faster, not as fast as before, but especially if you look at the construction sector, it had grown by 15.4%. So the story the rating agencies were trying to put forward, that the blockade was going to affect the construction sector and that was going to spiral out of control, they couldn't say that anymore. Construction grew by 15.4%. Part of it because 2016 was a particularly bad year for the construction sector. But that was to our advantage. Now, we say many times that the blockade is a blessing in disguise. And it is. And I want to explain why. It really changed the way people operate. And I'll come to that in the moving forward. But I launched a project with a student of mine and a colleague from the Qatar Financial Center. And because we think the blockade is a turning point in the history of the country, we wanted to record the many developments. If you read the news every day, you hear about a new initiative. If you go on Qatar Living, if you go on social media, there's a new initiative every day. So the Qatar Financial Center is putting aside $2 billion to support companies that set up offices here. We set aside $3 billion to support companies that would like to use our free zone near the port. So you have a lot of these initiatives. And everybody, Qatar Development Bank, the Ministry of Economy, the Ministry of Finance, the Central Bank, QFC, they're busy with their work, they launch these things. Nobody took time to actually record all the initiatives. So I set a team, and we are doing that because I think it will be important for the history of the country, for academics, for policymakers to have all the initiatives together. And then we went back in time 12 months before, day by day, to record the initiatives. And it's an ongoing project. It's funded by the Qatar National Research Fund. But the one thing we realized immediately, you have 3 times more initiatives in the 12 months post the blockade than you had before. But most importantly, if you compare the quality of those initiatives, they differ. So today we'll say we have this $2 billion for companies that would like to commit to 10 years staying here, and this is how we will use the money. And these are the criteria. If you read the initiatives before, they read something, this entity announces a plan to launch an initiative. And that's it. So now we are more serious. We mean business. And it's hard to quantify that with number, but you can look at the stock market. It's interesting in Qatar versus Dubai over the last 2 months. Okay. So yes, the blockade was really a wake-up call for us. Nobody will say that it makes things easier for us. Absolutely not. It doesn't help us diversify the economy, but institutionally, it changes how we operate. It motivated us in some levels. So I will summarize these 2 parts. And the economy is slowing down because of falling oil prices, falling infrastructure spending, falling purchasing power, and a mismatch between supply and demand in many sectors. I think the slowdown, unfortunately, will persist for another couple of years at least. The blockade had a muted impact, but in some ways it really benefited the country. Now, some people ask, will the World Cup help the economy? And the answer is, from an economic point of view, if you just want to look at a short period of time, absolutely not. The World Cup is an event for 1 month. But from a branding point of view, to showcase the country and the opportunities here and the people and the environment and the infrastructure, it's the best thing you can do to launch basically your country in the global arena. In 2012, I became the first academic to get access to all the tweets. And I launched a couple of projects. One was to look at Bitcoin. But the second one, with a student, we did a very, very simple exercise. We said, take all the tweets since the beginning of Twitter, and every day just count the number of tweets with the hashtag Qatar, in Arabic or in English. And just count how many tweets globally talk about Qatar. And this is the graph we got. This is December 2nd, 2010. That's the day Qatar won the right on live TV to host the World Cup. And most viewers, millions of viewers, probably had no idea where the country was. And what you see, immediately you see a spike. But what is more interesting, you see a structural change. From that moment on, we raised our branding as a country in social media. It really put us on the map. And before that, you ask many people in the business world, is winning the World Cup important? And if they're not in Qatar, they will not say it's that important. We bought Harrods, we bought a lot of other companies. It didn't get anybody's attention. We won the rights to host the World Cup, and it put us on the social map. I think it's good to be aware of that. So now the interesting part, moving forward. The question is, how do we grow next? How can we achieve the National Vision 2030? And the answer to that, to me, the answer is we need to innovate our way out. And by innovating, I mean in technology and business, but I also mean innovate in the way we communicate and collaborate with each other. Innovate in the way we evaluate projects. Innovate in the way we decide what projects to support and what projects not to support, in the way we monitor projects, we set targets, we need to innovate. So in the next stage, the private sector has to lead the way. But it cannot do it alone. We need the government to monitor, we need the government to support, we need the government to intervene when needed. So it will be a partnership now. We relied on the government all these years to launch the projects, to set up the infrastructure, but now the private sector has to pick up. And that's why the work of my colleagues at QFC and other entities, it is so fundamental in this stage. And we thank them for that. So there are challenges. The obvious are the economic challenge. We are a small country, and companies care about scale. Okay, so we need to recognize that. It's not a showstopper, but we need to recognize that. Doing business here is a little bit more expensive than other places, and prices do come down. And we have inadequate labor force, so you don't really start a lot of manufacturing projects because you have to import labor, and there's a limit to the high-skilled workers we have in the country because of a small local population. But there are ways to overcome those challenges. You also have institutional challenges. There is many times coordination failure among various stakeholders. There is very little collaboration and sharing. And why is that? I think part of it is because before, for that part of growth, it was very clear what the Ministry of Finance had to do. It was very clear what the Ministry of Economy had to do. It was very clear what the central bank had to do. There was no reason for collaboration. But now the problems we have to deal with, free zones, residence permit, changing the kafala system, it requires the different departments, institutions, ministries to come together and work together. And they don't have the skill because before they were more isolated, and now they are working on building the capacity that allows them to come together. So that's an area where we need more work. But again, that's an area that changed a lot post the blockade. We need to come together. Even sometimes within ministries, within institutions, you have departments that are still working on the way to collaborate together. That creates another problem. Who is in charge of the process? Is it Ministry A or is it Ministry B? Or should we appoint somebody at MD1 to be in charge because we cannot solve that? Again, that's something we need to resolve. We realized that our regulatory framework was not supportive of foreign investors. We need to change that. And again, the work of QFC has been fundamental. But if I may say, before the blockade, not many people were paying attention to the amount and the quality of the work that QFC was doing. And now that work is at the forefront. It takes a different sense of importance. And the work of QDB and the work of the central bank. I think the fourth challenge is that we don't have specific strategic priority areas for investment. Or we didn't have, and now we try to build them. We have a national vision, and we have a national development strategy that identifies some areas, but I think they are more broad. You need to be very specific. Okay, and these were the challenges before, and all of these are changing right now. I give an example of everybody talks about startups and entrepreneurship, and you have every possible institution you can think of, they will say that they have a program about entrepreneurship and startups. And if you ask them, who's the main agency here about startups, they will say, we are. And all of them will be, from Qatar Science and Technology Park, QFC, QNDB, even the central bank. And it's fine to have many institutions working, but we have to make sure we avoid redundancies, replication. So we need to innovate in the way we share information and collaborate. Many times you happen to talk to somebody and they say, oh, I didn't realize you do that. Can we meet for coffee and exchange some ideas? It could be as simple as that. So let me offer you a very simple economic model that I used to think of the economy. It's very naive and maybe incorrect, but I think it helps. Think of our growth in 3 stages. First one, you discover you have natural resources. What do you have to do? Borrow, create the infrastructure, monetize on the resources, and get the money. There's nothing else you need to do. And this is what the country has done. Now you have money in your pockets. What's the next thing you do? You either go out and you spend your money, or you build your country. You build the infrastructure. You build schools. You build hospitals. You build highways. And this is what the country has done. So now we are finishing the second phase. So the third phase is let's go out and get businesses to come here. Let's get people. Let's get foreign direct investment to come. And this is the journey we start right now. And the blockade came at the best possible point in time. It was, we hope we didn't have to live through it, but at least it came at the point when we needed to start going out, and now we are very serious on how we do that. It's a lose-lose situation for everybody, but we have to move on and we have to do what's best for this country. So how do you move on to the third stage? And I think you do it in 3 steps. First, when you have companies that come here and consider Qatar as a place to do business, we have to make it easy for them to set up a company. Okay, so we have to go to the drawing board and say, how many people do they need to visit? Can we bring the people together? Can we change the regulatory environment to support them? Can we reduce the cost of setting up a business? Can we help them get more information and data about this country? On the World Competitiveness Report, Qatar didn't rank very well. So the response of the policymaker was the following. Okay, how did they come up with that number? Well, they got information on this variable, on the regulatory framework. Okay, let's have one person assigned for every component and see how we can make things better from the ground up. And this is the right approach. Okay, so that tells you that if I come here as Dr. Alexis and I want to set up a business, I don't walk away and go to Cyprus because it's cumbersome here. But the second step is I have to be convinced to come here. So what we need to do, we need to come up with specific strategic priority areas. So when we go out and we talk to people, we tell them, Qatar is a great place, and actually there are a couple of areas where we think there's an advantage for you being in the country. We need to find what is our competitive advantage. I'll give you an example. We have 2 smart cities, Lusail and Musharraf, and they are empty cities. Why don't we go out to Volkswagen and tell them, we know you are spending a lot of money on autonomous vehicle. Why don't you bring your lab in Lusail? You cannot take your lab in New York because you have so many pedestrians, so many cars, bicycles, regulation, but you give them a city that's already wired, and it makes sense for them to test their cars, and then you bring Google Sidewalks Lab. You can create synergies. So we need to understand what we already have in the country and try to build. We don't want to launch projects, leave them aside, and then launch new projects. We need to be able to merge what we already created in the country. Because there's a lot of good infrastructure in the country, and we need to figure out where is our competitive advantage. So then when we go out and we talk to people, we go there with something very specific. Somebody told me many years ago, I don't know if it's in the audience, somebody working at Qatar Investment Authority. He told me the following that got my attention. He said, whenever a delegation comes to Qatar, they visit His Highness, and then they come to the Qatar Investment Authority. And they tell us, you should invest in Cyprus. It's a great place. You should invest in Bulgaria. You should invest in Greece. You should invest in Turkey. But what they don't tell us is where to invest. They don't come up with a project. It's not our job to go and figure out where to make investment. It's better to come and say, invest in Cyprus because I think this sector is very good. It creates synergies. And it goes back to what I said. It wasn't our skill to be salespeople. We are humble. We need to change that. We need to be specific. And the third area is to be able to improve the environment of setting up companies. To identify strategic priority areas, we need people to come together. So maybe we need to work on structures that will enhance collaboration, sharing, coordination, and so on. One area, there are 172 investment promotion agencies that offer a targeted approach to investment. Maybe you can set up such an investment authority. There are other things we can do, but can we work on structures, and there are some other ideas, but I cannot discuss here. Can we work on structures that will enhance information sharing? We say that data is worth more than oil these days. Data companies are worth more than oil companies. Data scientists are getting the same salaries as NBA stars. So data is key. If you work on a project, and I work on a project, and Dimitris works on a project, but we are in different institutions, can you imagine how it will benefit this country if we have a way to come together? But right now, you need to talk to your director, to write a letter to my director, and then I have to be careful what I say. So we need to change that. So to conclude, the economy is slowing down. The blockade has been a catalyst for change in the right direction. And we have seen a lot of improvement. So we need to continue to improve coordination and collaboration among agencies. Enhancing strategic planning will go a long way in helping the diversification effort. But there are still risks in the horizon. Interest rates in the US are going up by the Fed, the Federal Reserve Bank. Our currency is pegged to the US dollar, is fixed with the US dollar, which means that when interest rates in the US go up, we need to raise interest rates in the country. And that puts more pressure on our economy, on those that borrowed. That slows down the economy further. And we cannot avoid that because the currency is fixed. So that's one risk we need to be aware of. The second risk is there may be potentially a slowdown in the global economy. It may have started. And if there's a slowdown, there will be limited liquidity in the system. When things are booming, it's easier to get investment here, but when there's a slowdown, there's flight to quality. Everybody takes the money and parks them in the US. So that's another challenge. And the third challenge, which for obvious reasons I left at the end, is Saudi, the situation, the developments in Saudi Arabia. It's a challenge from an economic point of view, and from a social and security point of view. But we can elaborate more in the Q&A. Okay, and with this, I would like to end just to allow time for questions and answers. Thank you.